25 first and third person shooters to rock your Atari 400 Mini, coming up next. In this video, we take a look at many fun and technically impressive Atari 8-bit games that span the space shooter, ground shooter, third person, and even some modern style FPS shooters. All of these will work on your new Atari 400 Mini and on your real Atari 400, 800 XL or XE hardware, given you have the proper memory configuration and also in the emulation system of your choice. These first and third person shooters on the Atari 8-bit computer platform do not all resemble the classic type that most people think of when they hear the phrase FPS. This is because the current definition of that genre had not even been invented when this little 1979 powerhouse computer was released. Originally on the Atari 8-bit, these shooters came in three basic varieties. First, there was the Star Wars and Star Trek inspired 3D space shooters that began with the Atari 400 killer app Star Raiders, which is represented here by half a dozen titles that span the all-out arcade to the thinking man's shoot 'em up. The second is the Battlezone style shooter, where the player is in a vehicle of some type on a planet and needs to destroy the enemy while traveling in a 3D environment on a flat plane. These mostly consist of arcade blasters with a little strategy, using a radar scope to find and blast enemy and space vehicles of all types. The third type, behind-the-back spaceship or player third-person shooter, such as Buck Rogers, is much more rare but represented by a few games on this list. Sprinkled in here, we also have some unique games that both span and defy categorization. As the 80s moved on, the 90s dawned, and the 2020s retro revivals all took hold, more and more varied 3D and first-person shooters were crafted for Atari's Mini Amiga Zarjazz spewing 8-bit computer platform. To keep this list manageable, we will leave traditional military-style flight simulations, even those with a lot of action, to a later video. Let's take a look at 25 of the best here, and then check out the attached blog post to find out where you can obtain each to test out on your hardware, emulator, or new Atari 400 Mini. And yes, it does play Doom. So let's take a look at that first, and then go in alphabetical order. Adoom from 2023 by Zelix uses the 6502 assembly code from the VIC-20 Doom port and maps it to the fast, chunky GTIA graphics mode of the Atari 8-bits, implementing flat plane versions of the original Doom map. Alienbusters from 1991 by Blackfire Software is a nice Battlezone clone set in space on a flat planet surface. Assault Force 3D from 1984 by MPP is another Battlezone-style game that takes place on an alien planet utilizing simulated multicolored vectors to create nice wireframe game objects for blasting. Battlezone by Atari is a 1987 port of the arcade classic. This one done by Ken Rose of Rainbow Walker fame, specifically released for the XEGS almost 8 years after the arcade game was released. Blaster is a unique wireframe Zarjazz particle spewing good time of a 1984 Williams-developed 5200 game, which sadly went unreleased in the Crash era but was backported to a full arcade cabinet with limited release. Buck Rogers' Planet of Zoom from 1983 by Sega is a nicely crafted third-person shooter that captures some but not all of the fun of the arcade version. In Deathchase XE, a 2013 release by XXL, you play an elite mercenary patrolling a forest at night up against a load of enemies while on a motorcycle in the ZX Spectrum port. Dimension X, a Steve Hales tech demo made into a Surface 3D blaster and released in 1984 by Synapse, is one of those classic Atari 8-bit games that takes the Battlezone concept and adds spectacular Atari 8-bit graphics to the mix. The Eidolon, a 1985 Epix release using the LucasArts Fractal FPS engine to create a game where you collect gems and fireballs in various colors and battle baddies and dragons. Encounter by Paul Wokes of Mercenary fame is yet another fantastic flat plane blaster in the Battlezone mold, first released in the USA in 1983 by Synapse. Final Assault, released in 2021 by GMG, is a pure 3D FPS, much like Adoom, but with its own unique take on the genre. Midi Maze from 1989, written by Michael Park and unreleased by Atari, was originally created to show off the multiplayer-capable nature of the Atari ST, then ported to the Atari 8-bits. It is best enjoyed in a multiplayer fashion, but seen here is the fun bot search and destroy mode. Raid on Gravitron from 1983, released by the Atari Program Exchange, distills the essence of Star Raiders battles down to the basic fun-blasting Czar jazz that it is. Rescue on Fractalus from 1985 by Epyx was the first game to use the LucasArts 3D Fractal engine and is really more of a rescue mission than an all-out shooter. But we have George Lucas to thank for the addition of things to blast along the way in this Atari-funded first entry into the LucasArts fly in space first-person genre. The Space Harrier Sega arcade port, crafted by Chris Hutt in 2018, is quite possibly the single best action game ever released for the Atari 8-bits. Star Raiders. This 1979 Atari original killer app takes the basic Star Trek concept of protecting star bases from the enemy and adds the arcade blasting elements that all Star Wars fans had been playing out in their heads since the first film was released. Star Raiders 2 from 1984 is the unreleased Eric Wilmender update to the 1979 original. Star Raiders 2 from 1987 by Atari for the XEGS is a repackaging of the unreleased last Starfighter game with Star Raiders 2 branding and is probably the best all-out action version of the genre on this list. Starfighter from 1989, published in analog in page 6, adds Paul Lay's graphics and sound brilliance to the basic blasting of the Star Raiders formula sans the galactic map. Star Trek Strategic Operations Simulator, released in 1983 by Sega, takes a Star Raiders-like formula and reapplies it back to the original source material, removing the free-roaming 3D space, but keeping the fun arcade blasting. Star Wars from 1988 by Domark is a completely different version of the Atari arcade cabinet port from the 1984 original that Parker Brothers put out for many machines. It repairs some of the difficulty in destroying TIE fighters from the Parker Brothers game and adds a much cooler Death Star explosion. Star Wars the Arcade game is the 1984 Parker Brothers original, which I think is slightly more fun and a little easier than the Domark version, but you can't really go wrong by trying both. Stealth, like Dimension X, originating from a tech demo, a 1984 release from Broderbund, is the last third-person shooter on this list, and is both a fun blasting time and is a nice way to show off the graphics chops of the Atari 8-bit line. Sunstar from 1986 by Microdaft is one of the completely unique games on this list, and while it defies easy categorization, its first-person 3D visuals and maze-like layout are a treat to boot up and have a go at. Zero War, a 1991 bite-back release, is a unique game that pits you against alien baddies while exploring corridors on a spaceship, solving puzzles, and doing a lot of blasting. Note, at press time, Star Raiders 2, the last Starfighter version, Encounter, and Battlezone have all been announced to be included with the Atari400 Mini, which is really great to hear. That's it for this time, but what did I miss? Which genre on the Atari 8-bits do you think needs more exploring on the Atari400 Mini? Next time, we're going to take a look at some of the best platform games to play on your Atari 8-bit system, emulator, or Atari400 Mini. Until next time, have fun playing your choice of 3D Blaster in the vertical blank.
Programmed in BASIC, we explored 8-bit worlds. Pixels crashed onto a digital shore. All our records were scratched, left alone we were latchkey children, terrified of nuclear war. In the glow of the cathode ray, every game we play on our 2600 into the verse.